They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
I totally agree with Ron Burgundy. That didn't make much sense. I wonder who knows what movie that clip is from. Anyway, let's get into today's lesson, finding the percent. Yesterday, we set up percent proportions and talked about how that can be used to find the part, whole, or percent. We also talked about how using vertical number lines can help us estimate our answer and also check our answer for reasonableness. Go ahead and complete your notes, refreshing your memory on the percent proportion and the vertical number lines. If those are concepts that you don't remember, feel free to refer back to yesterday's video on finding the part. Let's go ahead and move into our first example of finding the percent. 22 is what percent of 110? So, first thing, 22 is, there's our part. What percent, meaning I don't know the percent this time. And so that's where we're going to place our variable. Lastly, of 110, so our whole, remember, is over of, places our 110 there. Still using our vertical number lines to estimate our answer. So I'm just going to set that my whole is 110, which is down here with my 100%. And I'm going to benchmark to see where my answer should be. So 50% or half of 110 would be 55. And then I'm just going to say 22 is maybe a little bit less than halfway here. And that's about where my percent should work out to be. Let's go ahead and use our benchmark or our table to set up our proportion. We've got 22 over 110 is equal to n over 100. From here, we know how to do cross multiply and divide. I have an equation set up here because my cross products have to be equal. So 110 times n should be equal to 22 times 100. I'm going to go ahead and simplify 22 times 100 is 2200. And then divide that by 110. Feel free to pause here, guys, and work it out on your own. But I've already done the work. And n is equal to 20. And I'm actually looking for percent, so I'm going to put 20%. Go ahead and work example 2 on your own. Pause the video here. Alright, so our second example, 17 is, so my 17 is the part, is over of. What percent, meaning I don't know the percent, I'm going to place my variable there, of 68. So 68 is our whole, is over of. From here, I can go ahead and set up my proportion. I've got 17 over 68 is equal to n over 100, and I'm going to cross multiply and divide. So 68 times n is equal to 17 times 100. 17 times 100 is 1700, and our last step is to divide by 68. Here, remember, 68n, or 68 divided by 68 is 1, and so we just got n left. Okay? And 1700 divided by 68 is 25%. If you used your percent benchmarks, you can make sure that your answer is reasonable. Halfway between 0 and 68 would be 34. There's our 50%. And then 17 is probably about halfway between 0 and 34. So my percent should be halfway between 0 and 50, which is 25%. All right, so let's now apply that to word problems. On a 120 question test, Edgar got 96 correct answers. What percent of the problems did he work correctly? So, first, on a 120 question test. So the test has 120 questions. That's the whole test. Edgar got 96 correct answers. So my part here is talking about my correct answers, and that's 96 correct answers. I want to know what percent of the problems did he work correctly. So I have the number that he worked correctly. I'm looking for the percent that he worked correctly. Now I'm going to use my percent or my vertical number lines to estimate my answer. So the whole test is 120 questions. I can estimate, or I know that 50% of that, or half of that, would be 60 questions worked correctly. And I can even go halfway between 50 and 100, 75%, which is halfway between 60 and 120, would be 90 questions. Okay? And so 96 is just a little bit more than 90. And so my answer, or my percent, should be a little bit more than 75%. So I'm going to go ahead and use this information, set up my proportion, and solve. So 120 times n is going to be equal to 96 times 100. 96 times 100 is 9,600. And our last step is going to be to divide that by 120 to find our percent. Again, if you want to pause here, work it out, make sure you got the right answer. But I'm going to go ahead and give the solution I've worked out. 9,600 times 120, 80%. If I look at my percent benchmarks, 80%, just a little bit more than 75%, so I know that my answer is reasonable. Go ahead and work the next example on your own. All right, guys, so let's discuss the last example. Of the 24 students signed up for the swimming class, 21 already know how to swim. What percent already know how to swim? So, of the 24 students, there's our whole, okay? There are a total of 24 students in our class. 21 already know how to swim, okay? And so when I'm looking at this part, I'm looking at the people who know how to swim, okay? And I want to know what percent know how to swim. And so there's my variable. I know how many know how to swim. I want to know what percent know how to swim. So our proportion's already set up. We're going to cross multiply. 24 times n is equal to 21 times 100. 21 times 100 is 2,100. And our last step is to divide that by 24. Our n should be equal to 87.5%. Again, you can use your benchmarks or your number lines to estimate or make sure that your answer is reasonable. Halfway between 0 and 24 is 12 at 50%. If we wanted to go halfway between 12 and 24, we've got 18 people would be 75%. And so we're looking at 21 people. We should end up with a percent that's somewhere between 75 and 100. Our answer is between 75 and 100, so we know that our answer is reasonable. All right, so that concludes our lesson on finding the percent. I hope that you'll go ahead and try the challenge problem that's on your notes. Make sure to show your work, set up those percent number lines and your proportion table. Also, there's a mistake on today's video. Yesterday's was in something that I wrote. Today's was in something that I said. Find that mistake and see what happens in class tomorrow. Bye, guys.